Welcome back to Historical Thinking in the AI Era, Episode 6. If you've ever looked at a photo of a keyhole-shaped Kofun from the air, you've probably asked the obvious question, why that shape? Why build something so enormous, and so specifically shaped? The answer isn't what most textbooks suggest. Kofun weren't simply burial places. They were political technology, tools for projecting power, establishing hierarchy, and locking in authority across time. Today's episode is about decoding the logic of Kofun culture. By the end, you'll understand why ancient leaders built the largest tombs in the world, and why, in a very real sense, we still do the same thing today. This is Episode 6, Why Were Kofun Built? Visualizing Power. Let's start with the structural argument, the causal chain that explains why Kofun existed. Step 1. Emergence of powerful figures. As we covered in earlier episodes, the Yayoi period produced the first chiefs and regional lords. Surplus rice created wealth, wealth created hierarchy, hierarchy produced leaders with enough resources to command large-scale labor. Step 2. Desire to display power after death. Here's where the story gets interesting. A chief's power is inherently fragile, it exists in the living person. When that person dies, so does the clear visual proof of their authority. Successors face an immediate legitimacy problem. How do you inherit power that can't be seen? The answer, the solution, was the construction of enormous tombs. Not simply to honor the dead, but to transform perishable human authority into permanent physical form. A keyhole-shaped tumulus covering tens of thousands of square meters cannot be ignored. It says, across time and to everyone who sees it, someone extraordinary was buried here. And by extension, the people who built this, and who now speak for the deceased, are the rightful heirs. The result, visualization of subordination. The completed tomb confirmed alliances and established social order in a way that oral proclamation never could. Subordinate clans who participated in the construction, and who paid tribute at the tomb, were making a visible, public declaration of their place in the hierarchy. The insight at the bottom of this slide is the thesis of the entire episode. Power becomes permanent when transformed into form. That is what Kofun were for. To understand why Kofun emerged when they did, we need to look at three forces that converged simultaneously in the 3rd through 5th centuries. Political structure. The Yamato polity was expanding. Local chieftains across the Japanese archipelago were forming coalitions, negotiating alliances, and subordinating themselves, willingly or otherwise, to the emerging Yamato center. This political consolidation created both the need for hierarchy markers and the organizational capacity to build at massive scale. Social change. Surplus from rice cultivation was concentrating wealth. Stratified society had replaced the egalitarian Jomon world. People now lived in a world where some commanded and others obeyed, and everyone knew it. The Kofun gave that social reality a physical form. Foreign relations. Exchange with the continent was accelerating. Advanced technology and the idea of legitimized royal authority were flowing in from China and the Korean peninsula. The concept of a ruler whose power was expressed through monumental construction was not invented in Japan, it was imported and adapted. Now trace the timeline at the bottom of the slide. In the early 3rd century, Queen Himiko ruled the Kingdom of Yamatai, a confederation held together largely through shamanistic authority and diplomatic skill. By the mid-3rd century, the first distinctive keyhole-shaped Kofun appeared. And by the 5th century, the golden age of giant tomb construction had arrived, culminating in Nintoku's tomb, which at the time of its construction was the largest tomb in the world by surface area. Larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. From chieftain to cosmic king in 2 centuries. The Kofun is the measure of that transformation. Let's apply the 3 perspective, why, framework to the deeper question. Why was visualizing power so important that leaders invested this kind of labor, resources, and planning into it? Perspective 1. Who benefits? The Kofun served as an apparatus for power succession. When a ruler died, the enormous tomb that remained wasn't just a memorial. It was an ongoing source of legitimacy for whoever came next. By displaying the deceased ruler's power in permanent form, the tomb secured the successor's claim to authority. The new ruler could say, "I am the heir of the person who built this." The tomb spoke on their behalf, eternally, and at enormous volume. Consider the alternative. Without the Kofun, a new ruler had only oral tradition and personal charisma to establish legitimacy. With the Kofun, they had an indestructible physical argument. Perspective 2. What changed? The Kofun represented a spatialization of order. a transformation of social hierarchy from a lived social reality into a structured physical landscape. Settlements were replaced by burial systems as the organizing principle of the political world. And tomb size directly indicated social rank. The larger the Kofun, the higher the position of the person buried within it. You could literally read the political hierarchy of early Japan by looking at the landscape. This was not accidental, it was a designed system. When you commission a tomb 3 times larger than your vassal's tomb, you are making a permanent, unchallengeable statement about relative power. Perspective 3. Why that timing? The 3rd century was a historical convergence point, a singularity where 3 forces hit simultaneously. Agricultural surplus provided the material resources, technological influx from the continent provided the engineering knowledge and ideological models, and the pressures of regime formation demanded new tools for establishing and communicating authority. Remove any one of these 3, and the Kofun culture might not have emerged in the form it did. All 3 together made it not just possible but necessary. Here's something that might change how you look at Kofun forever. The shape of the tomb wasn't an aesthetic choice. It was a political declaration, a code that every person in ancient Japan could read. Keyhole-shaped Kofun, the Zenpoko and Fun, with their distinctive combination of a circular rear mound and a trapezoidal front section, were the most prestigious form. They were distributed across Japan precisely through the Yamato alliance network. If you were a local lord who was allied with the Yamato kingship, you built a keyhole Kofun. The shape was, in effect, a badge of membership in the highest tier of the political order. It indicated both the highest social rank and strong ties to the center. Think of it as a medieval equivalent of a royal charter. The keyhole shape was the visual seal of Yamato recognition. Round Kofun, Enpun, were associated with local and regional chiefs of smaller to medium power. They were members of the alliance but in a subordinate position. Their round tombs placed them clearly within the political hierarchy, but at a lower rung than the keyhole elite. Square Kofun, Hokofun, had different cultural associations. They appear frequently in regions associated with continental immigrants, the Toraijin we discussed in episode 7. The square form suggests strong ties to continental culture, where this shape has precedence in Chinese and Korean burial practice. It is a marker of different lineage and different cultural roots within the broader alliance system. The insight from this slide: shape and size directly represent the order of the alliance. Ancient Japan had no written constitution, no national census, no formal charter of hierarchy. The Kofun landscape served as all 3 at once. You could survey the political order of early Japan simply by mapping the tombs. Kofun are not just spectacular architecture, they are time capsules, and what was placed inside them, the grave goods, changed dramatically across the Kofun period in a way that tells us something profound about how the nature of power itself was changing. In the early Kofun period, the 3rd and 4th centuries, tombs were furnished with bronze mirrors and magatama jewels. These were objects of priestly and shamanistic authority. The bronze mirror, in particular, had deep ritual significance. It was associated with the sun, with divination, and with the power to communicate between the human and divine worlds. A ruler buried with a bronze mirror was saying, "My power comes from ritual knowledge, from sacred legitimacy, from my ability to mediate between heaven and earth." Queen Himiko herself exemplifies this type of authority. Her power was explicitly described in Chinese records as shamanic, dependent on her spiritual gifts rather than military force. By the middle and late Kofun period, from the 5th century onwards, the grave goods changed almost completely. Iron swords and armor replaced mirrors and jewels. The message was now different. My power comes from military capability, from the ability to protect my allies and destroy my enemies. Warriors, not shamans, were the new model of leadership. This shift in grave goods tracks exactly with the political changes of the period. The Yamato kingship's military expansion, the increasing importance of iron weapons made possible by Toraijin technology, and the shift from a confederation of ritual leaders to a more coercive, militarized political order. What you choose to bury a ruler with is what you believe their power came from. The objects changed. The theory of power changed with them. No discussion of Kofun culture is complete without haniwa, the distinctive terracotta figures and cylinders that lined and decorated the tomb mounds. And understanding their function completely reframes what they are. Haniwa are not decorations. They are not simply art. They are, as the slide says, stage props for performing power, and the performance they were designed to run was eternal. There are 2 distinct types, with 2 distinct functions. Type A, cylindrical haniwa, formed rows along the tomb terraces and outer perimeter. Their primary function was to define a boundary. This is sacred ground, this is the domain of the deceased, do not enter casually. They separated the ritual space of the tomb from the ordinary world outside. Think of them as a permanent spiritual fence, but one made visible to everyone who approached. Type B, figurative haniwa, are the ones most people recognize from museum collections: warriors in full armor, aristocratic women with elaborate hairstyles, horses, houses, boats, chickens. These were arranged on the top of the tomb in configurations that recreated scenes from the life, or the funeral ceremony, of the deceased. A warrior haniwa arranged beside a horse haniwa beside a house haniwa was reconstructing the social world of the ruler. This person commanded warriors. This person owned horses. This person had a great residence. The result was a ceremonial stage, permanently set, never to be dismantled, visible to all who came to the tomb. It reenacted the status of the deceased across time, without requiring living witnesses, living performers, or living memory. The caption at the bottom captures it precisely. Haniwa are devices to eternally perform the status of the deceased. Every time someone viewed the tomb, they were watching a performance of power that never ended and never faded. Let's zoom out. The Kofun weren't a uniquely Japanese solution to the problem of power. They were a Japanese instance of a universal human strategy, and when we place them next to their most famous parallel, the logic becomes unmistakable. The Egyptian pyramids and the Japanese keyhole-shaped Kofun sit at opposite ends of the ancient world, separated by thousands of years and completely different cultures. But they share the same fundamental architecture of purpose. Both transform a mortal body into a monumental structure. Both solve the same problem. How do you take the finite, perishable existence of a living ruler and convert it into something that persists, dominates space, and commands authority long after the person has died? The difference between them reflects their different political contexts. The Egyptian pyramids express absolute divine power. The pharaoh was literally a god, singular and supreme, and the pyramid's vertical height and geometric perfection embodied that absolute claim. The keyhole-shaped Kofun, by contrast, express alliance power. The Yamato ruler was first among equals in a coalition of regional lords, and the distinctive keyhole shape, distributed across the landscape by alliance members, embodied a networked hierarchy rather than a single pinnacle. Same function, different form, different political message. But the underlying logic, colossal structure as universal device to elevate finite existence into eternal authority, is identical across both civilizations. This is what historians mean by universal structures of power. The specific cultural expression varies. The fundamental human need it serves does not. Now for the question that brings this ancient history into your daily life. What are the Kofun of the modern era? Look at the image on this slide. A modern cityscape of glass towers and communications landmarks standing beside a reconstructed Kofun mound. The juxtaposition is intentional and the question it raises is serious. Are modern skyscrapers and landmarks, corporate headquarters, government buildings, national towers, devices for the visualization of power in the same way that Kofun were? The structural comparison holds surprisingly well. In ancient Japan, the volume of earthwork in a Kofun directly indicated political rank. In the modern world, the height and location of a building directly indicates economic and corporate prestige. A company that occupies the tallest tower in a financial district, with its name on the building, is making exactly the kind of statement that a Kofun made. We are here, we are powerful, our presence is permanent. The conclusion of this slide is precise. Although the medium has changed, from packed earth to glass and steel, the function of authorizing power through visualization remains the same. The next time you look up at a city skyline, you are looking at the Kofun of your era. The rulers have different titles. The technology of construction is different. The purpose is identical. Let's close with the three structural keywords that define this episode's argument. First, visualization. Power functions only when it is made visible. Authority that cannot be seen, touched, or pointed to is fragile, dependent on living witnesses and human memory. The Kofun solved this problem by making power physically permanent. It gave authority a form that lasted centuries. Second, hierarchization. Differences in scale, in the size and shape of tombs, fixed the political order in a way that was immediately legible to everyone who saw the landscape. You didn't need a written law or a royal decree to know where you stood in the hierarchy. You needed only to compare your lord's tomb to the next lord's tomb. The landscape was the constitution. Third, perpetuation. Posthumous structures guarantee authority across time. The Kofun didn't just honor the dead, they worked on behalf of the living. Each generation of successes benefited from the permanent, visible, unchallengeable claim to power that their ancestors had built into the earth. Visualization, hierarchization, perpetuation, these are not just the keys to understanding Kofun, they are the keys to understanding how power has always worked, in ancient Japan, in every civilization, and in the world you live in today. That's episode 6 of Historical Thinking in the AI Era. The slide notes that next time, we'll hear directly from the Haniwa themselves. Episode 7 is titled, Haniwa Speak. If the clay figures of the Kofun period were given a voice, what would they tell us about the society that created them? That's the question we'll explore. If today's episode gave you a new way to see ancient monuments, not as dead relics, but as living arguments about power, please leave a like and subscribe. And I have a question for the comments. What do you think the Kofun of your era is? A skyscraper, a stadium, a viral platform? I'm genuinely curious what you think. See you in episode 7.